You know who monitors social media more than anybody? Your school board.
Hey there, this is Matthew Jennings, and on this edition of Peachjar Extra Credit, we are talking crisis. I'm very lucky to be joined here this morning with Boulder Valley School District, who is actually teaching a session here at Innsbruck. We happen to be at the beautiful conference hotel right now, Union Station, downtown St. Louis. So excuse some of the ambient noise. Maybe you hear banging. It's a very live place. It's coming to life. The conference is about to kick off for several days of professional development. These two gentlemen were so kind enough to take time out of their busy schedule. They're actually presenting on this very topic later today. Good morning. I can't thank you two enough for taking time out of your days to be here with me and talk about crisis communications. It's one of those topics that's huge. It always comes up whenever there's a session, standing room only. I'm sure it will be no different today. Anywhere I've gone at any other SPRA, this is one of the most requested topics. Let's just start off though, a little bit about yourselves, your backgrounds. Dr. Anderson, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Matthew, first of all, thanks for having us today. Randy and I, it's a pleasure to join you today. Rob Anderson, I'm superintendent of Boulder Valley School District. I'm starting my 6th year. Wow. Yeah. But one of those years was during COVID, so I think I should get a few extra credit years there.
We all should.
And then, we'll talk a little bit about the Marshall Fire, which was a devastating crisis, tragedy in our community. But prior to being in Boulder Valley, I was deputy superintendent, chief of staff, and a principal supervisor in Fulton County in Atlanta, Georgia. 100,000 students, one of the largest districts in Georgia. And prior to that, 16 years in Orange County Public Schools in Orlando, Florida, as a teacher, assistant principal. I've been blessed with lots of really great experiences in 3 amazing school districts, and it's really helped, I think, shape the way that I communicate and the way that I think about communicating in crises. So excited to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Randy, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Randy Barber. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Boulder Valley. I've been there just 1 year longer than Rob, and was able to be with him as he joined our school district and introduce him to the community. I come from television news originally. I was in local television for 13 years. And then made the transition to school PR, Douglas County for a few years. Got a lot of political experience down there. Yeah. It's been definitely something to watch, but very excited to be in Boulder Valley. Yeah. And like Rob said, we've had our own challenges as well.
That's great. Well, 2 huge roles. I know you're very busy. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I do want to just kind of put a disclaimer out there. I already know that these two gentlemen are a lot like myself. We like to bring some levity to our life, just our daily routines. The jobs that we have are very demanding. We do carry a lot of stress and worry about just every one of the people in the community around us. And that's just part of the job. So I just say as a disclaimer, if we're making, a light of any given topic that we're talking about today, it is not to paint a picture of that this is fun. It's certainly not. Especially in times of crisis. This is a very serious topic, but we might also have some fun here as we just talk through things together. What I'd love to do is just start out with some definitions. When I've done crisis communications trainings in previous districts that I've worked at, I found it really helpful to talk through what is a crisis and what isn't. I always found it interesting. Any one thing could happen and it's a crisis. It's an emergency, and maybe it's a principal that's just got a really hectic schedule, a lot on their plate, and a kiddo gets hit in the crosswalk, and they want emergency messaging out to everybody. It was witnessed, and that's not necessarily a crisis. So I'd love to just define what that is. And so I'd love your feedback here. I always say an issue is just something that is a sensitive subject, and they kind of escalate. It's a matter in dispute, maybe a sensitive subject. Going back to the crosswalk example, it might be a crosswalk that's a known hotspot. There's been issues in the past, people are talking about it. Then you have an accident, which is now you have something that's happened there on campus. Maybe it's a student that has had a minor injury in that crosswalk. Then there's emergency, and that's where it's a serious situation that demands immediate attention and some communication. And then you have the level of crisis, which is also critical, emergency, and our response will literally dictate and drive trust, our brand, our connection to the community at large. And so for me, a crisis is how we react to an emergency. If we've reached a level of something it's so serious that it will literally affect our reputation and the trust we've established in the community, that to me is a level of a crisis. You mentioned the Marshall Fire. Those kind of things to me are elevated to a crisis. Do you ever talk about definitions? And in what ways?
Well, I think that Randy's done really great work in training our principals and our leaders around this exact topic, Matthew.
That's
and
great.
I think it's really important. And it's important to know and understand that people are going to define this differently, right? And you want to support them, and you want to give them the tools to support themselves, right? So I think Randy does a great job. He's established pretty tight protocols around what constitutes a crisis type of a mass communication in our district. And then where does the communication need to really come from the leader or the school where it's most effective? And I think that depending upon the situation, it depends upon how you respond. But the key is making sure that you're clear with expectations up front. And then it doesn't matter who calls Randy, he picks up the phone.
Yeah.
He walks them through kind of where they should be and what they need to be. In the moment helps them. And then sometimes afterwards, as we're kind of reflecting and reviewing and trying to improve, that's where a principal supervisor, somebody may come in and say, next time, here's the tools that you can have so you can do that. So so that you don't have to make that emergency call. That's
so great. Do you mind, Randy, sharing a little bit about that training, maybe what that looks like, how you conduct that? Is that once every year, at the beginning of the year? How does that work?
Yeah, we actually do start it at the beginning of the year. We're getting ready for this year's rollout. It's one of those things where principals are great. They, some of them know how to do this off the cuff, but every year coming back from summer, it's a little bit rough. It is easy for them to forget who to call and what that protocol is. And I would say that's one of the key differentiators between a crisis and an emergency. We deal with a lot of what I would say would be emergencies on a daily basis.
Yes.
I mean, we're a fairly large school district, about 30,000 kids. And you end up having, situations like you said in the crosswalk or, something occurs at the school. That is an emergency. In the eye of the beholder, it might be a crisis depending on what's going on.
Yeah.
But the idea that you have, some standard operating procedures that you're utilizing, in our school district, we do something that's called 2 calls, do it all. You've got 911. You got to be able to take care of the emergency services folks and make sure the police or the fire department or whoever needs to respond is there. But then we've got our security office that operates as, your second call, and they then distribute that information to everybody else, so that we're not. When I first arrived in Boulder Valley, there, and I've seen this in my other school district that I served as well, that it can tend to be, you've got your leaders. There's a lot of phone calls going back and forth, a lot of confusion as people are trying to do that. You really want to streamline that communication.
Yeah.
And then again, have practical standard operating procedure on what happens in what situations that is sort of taught. Professional developed throughout the year for your office managers, for your principals. It's people in your own office.
Yeah.
Because everybody's going to have to answer the phone when these things happen. And if you can have them on your side and knowledgeable about how it works, you take away some of that element of confusion, which, back to the point, it can start with an emergency that's being responded to. And because of the way that people respond, can lead to a crisis because people are feeling that you didn't do a good enough job, or maybe somebody makes a political slip, says something to a parent that they shouldn't, that kind of thing.
That's a really good point. And then in that kind of order of notification you're talking about, at what point do you bring in the board or notify the board? And who, is that you, Dr.?
Yeah, that's always me.
Yeah.
And it should always be the superintendent. I think that with the way that our relationship works with my board, and I would advise any superintendent to have a similar policy, no surprises. If a board member has heard about something that's happened in our community from somebody other than myself, then I failed.
Yeah.
And that is the expectation that I've set for our team.
He calls it the Publix rule.
Yeah. So now we don't have Publix in Colorado, but if you're in the South, it's the absolute best grocery store. I don't get endorsed by Publix, but it's the best. It's the best grocery store. But if you hear about something in the produce department at Publix, then and before you've heard it from your superintendent, something's going wrong. Yeah. So I am always. I've trained our team. And not just Randy. Randy gets it, right? It's some of the other communicators that if something's going down, I will let the board know first prior to letting anybody else know, which means you've got to be quick, you've got to be tuned up. It can't be an afterthought. and that's a critical component, because if your board is left hanging out to dry, and a community member goes to a board member, doesn't understand the role of a board member, asks them, hey, why didn't you know about this? And then they don't know, then they're caught flat-footed, they're embarrassed. That's never good for a superintendent.
Yeah, no, it's not. And then fortunately, unfortunately, it's never good for anybody underneath the superintendent as well. Yeah, I've always found that my boards that I've gotten to work with, they've always really had a really great relationship with me. And I think, for one, they know that a lot of times I'm the one getting the call. Superintendent's the first to get that notification, then it goes really quickly out to them. So they know that the communications department is a critical component to them getting the message quickly. And so they've just always really valued that.
So in Boulder Valley, like, when you do this well and you build trust and you have an amazing communications team, and Randy's is just truly incredible, the board will reach out to him, and in some instances, Randy will reach out to them if I'm in the middle of trying to do something, just because it's so important that they get communicated with. And then he and I are really the checks and balances for our entire school district to make sure that the board's communicated with. But if you do it well and you set that expectation, and it's easier to bring other, your comms team in the fold to be able to do some of that direct communication in a way where the board isn't going to be like, well, why is he telling me? Why aren't you telling me? Right? Like, we've been able to build the trust, so that's not an issue for us.
And I think they also understand that, when things are happening and you're talking about a serious crisis, that the first thing that has to be worried about is that school and the students and the parents. And so I believe that also one of the things that Dr. Anderson has done very well is build that kind of concept of, we've got to address this. We're going to be there. We're going to do what we call a waterfall and hit every group that matters along the way. But it may take a couple minutes while we're getting that, getting that group taken care of, getting that school supported and comforted.
It makes a lot of sense.
But very quick if we can.
Yeah, and it's really hard. Like, it's never fast enough. When one of the after action things I've talked to other districts about, like, what are some of the things you learned from that? Is, man, I wish that I would have gotten that first initial messaging out quicker, whatever. It's just never fast enough. We do what we can. We don't want to get it inaccurate. When I got my pilot's license, one of the things I learned in the event of an emergency is first aviate, then navigate, then communicate. So very first, aviate, meet the moment of the emergency, kind of like what you just said. Then navigate, where do we need to go next? What's our immediate next steps? And then communicate. And you do it in that order. And the FAA expects it in that order. And so it's very important in our world as well, that first you're meeting the moment of that crisis. I think it's good to maybe take one further definition, two terms that I find can get confused by parents, media too, because a lot of times we're covered by reporters that maybe aren't on the education beat. And this can also turn an emergency into more of a crisis when the story goes out. How do you define shelter in place versus a lockdown? How do you talk to people about that difference?
Well, I think that the fact that we do have a pretty national and internationally recognized system through the I Love You Guys Foundation. This is a group, a parent that actually started it, Michael John Keyes, I think is his name. Platte Canyon was in Colorado. Unfortunately, we've had far too many active shooters in our state. But these have led to great improvements. After Columbine, the idea of how do you secure, harden your building. After Platte Canyon was really about the messaging and how do you communicate in a way that the police and the fire department understands, your parents can understand. One of the things that they did early on that was a little bit confusing is that they called things lockout, lockdown, and that caused a lot of confusion. And so I know a lot of school districts really gave a lot of feedback, and that's what we use. That's what we sort of set our communication and emergency around is that standard response protocol is what it's called. So, you start with that idea of you can secure the perimeter. That's a, secure now is what they call it instead of lockout. Lockdown is when you have an active shooter on campus, your locks lights out of sight. Shelter in place, and I think this is where, going back to your idea of with principals, these things may sound similar. And so if you activate the wrong thing, you've got people moving in the wrong direction. Yeah. And so I think you also have, unfortunately, as we've seen in some of these cases, active shooters that are smart in regards to activating things like evacuations. If they hit the fire alarm, they know that people will leave their place of safety. And so, by having those terms, so again, shelter in place is really where you hunker down. You usually, like, this is a tornado kind of situation, maybe a wildfire nearby, that kind of thing. And then evacuation is, of course, what most of us do during a fire alarm. Yeah. By having those terms and being really clear about what happens during it, and then building your communication around that. We've got very good templates. They're pre-built into our system, and we're actually doing a lot of work around that this summer because we've back to your thing of it doesn't ever feel fast enough.
Yeah.
And being in a system where we were having to go in and change the name of school, or put in the name of the school into 12 places in the message, I mean, it was way too much. So now we're creating a system where you've got all these things pre-built, which causes other kinds of headaches of management of all those messages. But if you can be prepared for that, and again, train. The parents have got to hear it nonstop about what do we mean when we do this. The principals have got to know and know how to activate that. And then I think somebody had said, you go back. I think Dr. Anderson said that. You have to go back, and when something does happen and it's not in alignment, then have those conversations in a positive, constructive way of, okay, we understand that you were in the middle of it. This is kind of what happened. Can we go this direction to make sure that we, activate this better next time? Always continuous improvement. You got to just keep learning. You got to keep improving.
Well, I love that thing that very clearly answered. And it all goes back to training and really being clear about your definitions. The words that we use are so important. All right. So in your presentation, you talk about like an origin story. So let's start with you, Randy. Like, tell me about what's that origin story? How does that fit into this crisis conversation?
Certainly. So when you think about superheroes, there's always, something that's happened that's forced them into this service or whatever. Yeah. Spider-Man got bit by some radioactive spider. I hope that never happens to me. I hate spiders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Indiana Jones's snakes for me is spiders. But for sure, where did Wonder Woman come from, or Superman, or whatever? So for me, my origin story was I came from news, and so obviously I knew how to react quickly, I knew how to write quickly, that kind of thing. But I was completely terrified about the idea of an active shooter specifically. I was lucky while I was in Douglas County not to have that situation develop inside the school. Yeah. But we did have a situation with a deputy firing at a suspect within yards of a school. And, again, it feels like it's a common theme here. Information did not flow quick enough. The principals, didn't take the actions that the parents thought they should have in order to keep kids safe. And so, and again, it's hard to look back. In 2020, it's a lot clearer to, in that kind of viewpoint. But when you're in that situation, you're just trying to keep kids safe and you're not thinking through everything. So that was really my reckoning with my communications team there, is that we really needed to have a better, tighter system. We needed to have better ways of communicating as a staff. We need to have those templates. It's not that we didn't have anything. Yeah. But they weren't good enough. And so that's what really set me on a trajectory to make crisis communication a primary thing. And then when I came to Boulder Valley, it was a great thing. Again, I saw some of those signs again, and I was like, nope, we're gonna implement a program here. Yeah. And thankfully my director of security has been a great part. And I would say that's a really important thing. Yes. You got to have the partners in the right places. Your leadership, school leadership, superintendent have to back it. If the superintendent's saying, oh, that's not important, we don't have to, communicate, or we don't have to abide by the way that we meet and communicate, you've got problems. If your director of security is not behind it, I mean, that's the guy that trains people on how to respond to the emergency, or woman. And so, I mean, it has to be a whole group there. So that's where I came from, for sure.
And Dr. Anderson, what about your origin story?
Mine's a little different. It's less about crisis communications and more about communications in general as a superintendent.
I love that.
And so when Randy, came and thought up this idea, and I loved it, I started to really think about what was it that drove my philosophy on how I communicate. Okay. And it was before I was a superintendent. It was actually my first superintendent interview. And this was, this was 7-8 years ago. And I was preparing for the interview. I was ready to go. I had all the information, over-prepped, right? And so when it came to answering questions, I answered what I thought people there would want to hear versus who I was. Oh. And when I called my mentor, because it was on TV, and I was like, how'd you think I did? He's like, who was that? Oh. That wasn't even you. Bombed the interview, did not do a great job. Well, what they say is you learn more from your failures than from your successes. And I promised myself at that point that I was always going to be myself, someone who's genuine, who's honest, empathetic, working in humor as often as I can, because that's just who I am as a communicator. Yeah. And I did that in my next interview in Boulder Valley, and things worked out great. And ever since, I just try to be as genuine as I can all of the time to build trust, because when you're in a crisis, if people don't trust you or or they think that you're saying something that's not genuine, not real. That's the worst thing you can do. Is to really break that trust with your community. So I'm very personable. I try to do that all of the time. And so my origin story is a little different, but you got to be yourself, whoever that is.
I love that. Yeah, two beautiful messages, absolutely. And I really love the passion behind just being yourself from the level of a superintendent, because it is critical. You are the leader of the school district. Parents, guardians, the community have to see you as a real human, relate to you. You have to be connectable. You have to be out there. So that's just a really great message. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's talk about before crisis. You touched on this. I did the same thing in my district, and that's things you need to have in place. So we'll talk through some of those high level things, template messaging, critical relationships, that kind of stuff. Walk me through what your setup and prep is at a little deeper level than we have on before crisis. What do you need to have in place?
I want to just, again, bring up what Rob said there, which is that relationship is key. Yeah. When I think about COVID or the Marshall Fire, any of those things, having relationships with people, and I think with your public, your parents, your staff, that eases the situation when things happen. And so I think, even before you get down to creating a plan and templates and all that kind of stuff like we were talking about, meeting with your public information officers locally. I mean, when I came to Boulder Valley, that was the first matter of, first thing on my agenda. Yes. Was to go and meet with every one of the police and fire folks. I don't want to meet them on the scene of a crisis. I want to know their name. I want to know where they come from. I want to know what they prefer.
When they're sitting out the press release.
Right, exactly. I mean, hopefully come to some agreements in regards to how things work too. And that can be a rocky road. It's always a partnership and something that you're working through. But I think that having relationships is key. And then, I would say that, really as a communication leader, you want to be thinking about everything that's possible that can happen. Yeah. And so part of it, the way I would break it down is, again, the standard operating procedures. How do people work? What should they expect? When you have a, lockdown happen, what's the messaging that goes? How does that run? Again, just even the way that you communicate. We use Google Chat. In Douglas County, we use Slack for this process. But that ability to have online some ability to communicate amongst leaders, rules around that so that it's not crazy. It's like an open mic. If you're at the school and you see something and it's something that you want to share, great. But this is not the place to be chatting it up and asking dumb questions, although I guess there's some places where no dumb questions. I think during a crisis there can be dumb questions. We really need to keep it on topic and moving. And then again, your templates, the communication, all those building blocks to what you're going to do, and then you're constantly working on training. How bringing your own team together. I also strongly believe that communicators are only a part of the picture. We want to empower our leaders. In the Marshall Fire, one of the things that happened that was unusual was that I was pretty much by myself. It was winter break when it struck. So a lot of my team was on vacation. We had also gone through some changes. I had a member of my key right-hand person left the district just a couple months before, and we were in the process of trying to hire somebody. Okay. So we were kind of depleted in terms of the ranks. I believe that everyone around you can also act as communicators and be a key part. Since then, we've implemented a call center. So our academic administrative assistants actually help to get on a call. If parents are calling in, we can actually divert the call. Thank God for technology. You can actually move the calls directly from the school over to us. Now. They don't. The switchboard at the school is not going to be answered when they've got when they're all locked down.
So true.
So if you can answer people's questions and have that system, but again, it's that ability to pull people in. For them to know, I think that's a key part of it. They need to know what they are supposed to do and how to do it, because by the time you're in the middle of the real deal,
points,
too late.
Statements,
that's critical. How do you share that latest information so that the right stuff is going out amongst a large group of people that are answering those calls?
Yep.
So
that's brilliant. And if that's not something you've leaned into yet, that's a really great tip right there. Make sure you're leaning into your team. We did similar in my previous districts, and that is having people on standby to take calls. Because it's really, if you haven't gone through a crisis yet, a significant crisis, it's just a matter of time. It's going to come knocking on your door. You want to be prepared for that. The template messaging that has been mentioned here, If you don't have template messaging in place yet already, reach out to your local SPRA chapter, whatever state you're in, other fellow PIOs that you look up to that has done a really good job, or maybe a district that's gone through something recently that you've seen. The national chapter in SPRA has a lot of great resources. You can get other people's template messaging and then start building from there. Everybody's happy to share. I know that much. Reach out to me.
Yeah.
I'm sure Randy, happy to share what we have for template
NSPRA's actually
structures.
got like an actual kit, I think.
Yes,
even
like a toolkit. So,
not to mention the sessions at a place like the seminar.
So don't be afraid to do that and get that in place for yourself. It is critical. Thank you for kind of sharing that out. We've covered before crisis very well. One thing I did not do in my district, you probably are doing this, but I did not have the PIO's number at the local hospital. So in the event of like a significant crisis, students are being shipped off, you might not know where they're getting sent to, and you need to have that information be including in your messaging to parents. That was something I heard some school districts share yesterday, and I was like, I need to remember to get in touch with the local hospitals because I don't have them on speed dial. Okay, so let's talk about during a crisis then. So walk me through some of those kind of high-level aspects. Now you're in the heat of the moment. What's your plan?
Yeah, so I mean, again, you're getting a call of some sort. I think one of the key things to remember is that there's a lot of inaccuracies in the first moments, and so you're trying to make sure that you're both rushing to try to get information out and let folks know what's going on. We serve part of our role is to let them know that there is danger and they need to take action. Obviously, the schools themselves have certain systems in place, like they're able to hit a button and alarms start to go off and those kind of things, and so that's helpful. But you've got to kind of be able to get that information out there so that they know to react.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got to make sure that's balanced with accuracy. And so that, we actually had a situation recently at one of our high schools where that was the core constraint. We were getting intel of a possible attack. We had images of this, situation.
Social media? Or?
It was social media.
Okay, yeah.
The individual had posted a screen grab from a video game that was violent looking, and they had placed in students' faces into the faces of the people that were in this game. Okay. And it was clear that there was a violent intent there. And so, part of it is that does, just because you see that, and again, when people from the school, like parents would see it, they could make those connections to students. When our security officer, even the administration got it, they didn't really know for sure that it was Fairview that was being targeted. That was the school that was impacted.
Okay.
And so, there's a little bit of a process that has to go through to determine what that is. We're now working with law enforcement. Again, security's got strong connections with them. They pulled them in. They're doing the right things at the school of immediately, taking actions to protect people, that kind of thing. But messaging hasn't gone out yet. And so we're waiting for the police department. We're waiting for security to kind of clear what can we say and that kind of thing. You don't want to be too far ahead of that. No. And yet at the same time, there is an element of something is happening. Yeah. We are taking security actions. And so that actually, I think, would be one of the biggest things that we took away that day. Right, Rob?
Yeah. When it comes to the speed of communications, social media is undefeated. It is. And it's hard, right? Like if you're out first, you're able to clearly articulate what's happening. If something else is out first, right, which is inaccurate, then you're trying to clearly communicate what's happening and dispel the rumors.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really, really tough. I think that in the instance that Randy was speaking to, it's this balance of speed. What can you get out without being inaccurate? So you could try to get ahead at least, so folks know that you've been out there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's the balance that you're always trying to navigate during a crisis. Getting out fast versus being able to give all of the information. And so I think that, so St. Louis is a baseball town, right? Sometimes you're just trying to get on base. Yeah. Right. You're not trying to hit a home run, right? Yeah. You're just trying to get a single. You're trying to get on base. Like, so in a crisis, how do you get out there? How do you hit a single? How do you say, hey, listen, we know this is happening. We're doing things. Kids are okay, right? We'll be back with more information, right? And then try to load the bases and then, maybe hit a home run after, you're out of the throes of the just what in the world is happening.
So that's, I'd like to expand on just kind of your view from the eyes of a superintendent, Dr. Anderson. So in my previous district, my director of student services and I were the ones that took the calls. So emergency happens, you don't stop calling until one of us picks up the phone. One of us will do that. If for whatever reason you couldn't get a hold of us, then the associate superintendents, we had a whole lineup, right? But it got to the point where, that director, her and I, we'd see each other's phone numbers pop up, and we just that dread, like, oh no. So it got to the point where we'd actually just call each other and say, have a good day. Like, hey, just checking on you. How you doing, right? So we didn't want to bring each other down. So walk me from the position of a superintendent, kind of outside of the lanes of maybe communication, but when you get the call, something's going down, a crisis, what are some of your first thoughts in terms of support for the school, the principals, administration? What goes through your head as a superintendent?
It depending upon the crisis, right? My first call is always to Randy, right? So we can game plan on who's going to do what, right? And typically what'll happen is I'll get the call from like our emergency services team, our operations team, and they may have already connected with Randy, so he has a heads up, right? But I'm always going to connect with our chief communication officer, Randy, to kind of say, okay, what's the situation? What do we know? What can we communicate? Then, like I shared before, Matthew, I shoot something to the board. Hey, everybody, this is happening. We're on it. I'll text you or I'll email you back once I have more information, right? And then, again, right, as Randy and I are talking, we start to talk about kind of what needs to be communicated to who. In case of the Marshall Fire, you had, first of all, Randy and I were affected. Yeah. Right. My neighborhood was evacuated. Randy's, and we have kids, right? We're like, we're people. So, Randy, is family okay? Everybody okay? All right, here's what you're doing. I was out of town. But in that instance, it was, okay, we need to get to our principals and find out all of the kids and all of our employees that were affected because we got to check on them and take care of them.
Beautiful.
And then we're going to have to say something to our community, right? But let's take care of our people first in this instance, because there's a lot of people communicating to the community and there's news channels, everything. And so, depending upon the crisis, it's, communicating with chief communications officer, who are you communicating with and what are we trying to do? Are we trying to get on base, right? Maybe not, now's not the time to try to, hit a home run, right? Let's just get on base. Let's tell people we know what's happening. We're in communications. And so, a couple of smaller communications, keeping in touch, makes people feel like, what? They're telling us what they know. They've got it. They're on it.
That's cool. That's great. Thank you so much. That means a lot, just kind of that perspective of a superintendent. It was something I never got to ask one of my superintendents that I worked with. Like, what do you think when I call you and notify you of some bad day that's taking place?
And I'll just mention too that, and I'm thinking about the swatting situation that happened at one of our high schools. It was, nationwide, we've been having this issue, right? And it hit us, and unfortunately we were at the beginning of the alphabet. So, it was not as clear as later when they hit, the S's or whatever that this was definitely kind of, a false deal. But so we're responding to an active shooter. And I think one of the things that a superintendent can really do is keep the wider lens. Me and my team, we're tight to the school that's impacted. We're thinking about that direct area. And, I think rightfully the superintendent's lens was, our community is railing. We're hearing about staff that are concerned in other places. We've got other schools that aren't sure if they're impacted. And so I think that, he's able to bring that to the table, reminding us about, that wider, issue that we have to face as well. Yeah. And so there's a balance, I'm kind of talking about what we're doing, and okay, as soon as we get this out and we're taking care of that community, that we're able to go back out there and talk to everybody and do that.
Well, when you
quickly.
have a team like that, and I'm sure this is, I already know kind of your spirit and your empathy, servant leadership, right? So like when you have a team like that, then you're really in there in the weeds, and you really get to step out there and be that leader.
Well, it's the relationship and trust that you build. Superintendent and communications, chief communications officer have to. I think Randy could write my Christmas cards, right? Like we know each other so well. You have to have that relationship, and we win together and we lose together. It's not, it's not a top down. If you're a superintendent and the way that you're communicating is you're dictating and directing, you're going to get it wrong. You can't. It's just you have to have that collaboration, in my opinion. And so that relationship is always, we're in this together. We win together, we lose together. We win more than we lose, which is good. But then when we lose, then I take responsibility. And I think that's important.
And I would say one of the things I always tell communications people, especially when they're new into PK-12, is, especially when you've got a new superintendent coming in, you got to, the way to marry that superintendent is to be out there on that superintendent tour when they first get there, be out in those schools. I know it's a lot of time and that kind of thing, but you get to know somebody very quickly. I mean, I think all of us have to kind of get to know the voice and that kind of stuff, but you really got to understand that philosophy. And then what that pays later on, I mean, going back to the Marshall Fire, that ability for the superintendent to not only look at staff, but to be able to say, kind of tailor our communication a little bit. Yeah. Again, I'm going to have my viewpoint. I'm trying to get things out that I know that are urgent, but for him to say, we've really got to take care of that staff. And so the early video message that we put out wasn't so directed to parents and students. Again, the community was putting a big bear hug around them. We were able to talk right to the staff that, we're opening up schools. We're doing it on time, which was sort of in debate. And we need your support. And we know that you're also hurting. You're part of this just like we were. And I think that was key. Again, it's not a viewpoint I would have had. It's all of us working together. And I don't think I would have had that if we hadn't taken that time early on. They get to know each other. And it's not that we can finish each other's sentences. Yeah. Although, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I can tell that the two of you work really, really well together, which is an incredibly important relationship to have. Much like your relationship probably with your tech director, an incredibly important relationship to have, the security director, right? So very, very good. I want to talk about maybe two other points really quick that always seem to come up when these conversations are discussed. And I want to move into like after crisis. But one is, don't know which one of you mentioned it. One of you actually mentioned it, but it was kind of in passing, and it's a really critical point, and that is identifying your audience, and when it needs to be narrow in scope, don't be afraid to do that. So in other words, if you've got something isolated, maybe to just one school or one classroom, it's okay to narrow the scope of your communication in that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be a district-wide communication or a completely school-wide communication. There's always seems to be a question around like, how broad do we go? And unfortunately, there's just not a rule in stone anywhere. And it also comes up when there's like those national emergencies, and then everybody's debating, well, do I also send something out? Do I speak to something that happened, 4 states over? So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but just that kind of tending to how broad your audience is. How do you wrestle with that?
I think it's a feel.
Yeah.
I wish I had a formula to give you. I don't think there is one. If you're in tune with your community, as a superintendent, if you're doing a good job, you should have your finger on the pulse of the nuances of your community. Yeah. Right. That we have, 6-7 municipalities, 500 square miles. Something that happens in Broomfield, Colorado versus in Boulder, Colorado versus in Nederland, Colorado. Like if you have to be in tune, and then that helps as we partner on what are we communicating, how deep are we going, how broad are we going, because there's this balance. If you're always sounding the fire alarm, you can't be crying wolf, right? Like so you want to dial in the communication specifically to where it needs to be, and then expand when you feel like it's necessary, or your comms team should have a finger on social media, because if we get it wrong, they're going to let us know pretty quick. Yeah. And then if we respond and thank them for letting us know that it wasn't broad enough, then that actually becomes a win, not a loss.
So true.
It actually becomes, gosh, they listened, they're in tune. Yeah. And I never claim to be perfect. And I'll just tell people, look, we're not perfect. We're trying to do the very best job that we can. If somebody tells us a way to do something better, we're going to listen and we're going to do that. But if you draw a line in the sand, or if you're tone deaf, or if you don't know and say, this is what we do as the district, right? You're going to be eating it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
So true.
Yeah.
Very good point.
And I really believe in narrowcasting as well. I mean, so during the Marshall Fire, the first phase was evacuation. There was this gigantic area of people impacted. And so one of the things that we actually did was we used our senior planner to match up that area geographically that was impacted. Thankfully, the emergency responders were able to give that to us pretty quickly. So we could see both staff and students that were impacted and start to communicate with them directly. And then as things went, we knew that, it was mostly the people that had lost their homes, that things were damaged, they were still displaced. There was a lot of people that returned back home, and thankfully everything was okay. But we needed to keep a drumbeat for them long-term. There was constant amounts of resources that were coming out from different places that we could share, updates in regards to what they needed to know. And so, that ability, and again, I think it goes back to it's a little layered approach. Yeah. For them, they needed to hear from us regularly often, and then it, sort of came off. Although I will say, emergency crises have long tails. We've got parents that are have been talking to us about concerns around the health and safety of students on ASH and that kind of thing. And so, I think truly when you have something like this that impacts the community, they lose their trust in the world a little bit, because they felt safe and secure in their neighborhood, and then this fire came through and destroyed more than 1,000 homes. Wow. So but again, communicating with that group specifically, a more general, we after the first thing, I think we've sent out maybe 4 or 5 general all emails around that fire, including an anniversary one that just happened. Of course, a family that lives, on the other side of the district isn't going to need that communication as much.
Yeah.
You definitely need to communicate to everybody at the beginning. Everybody's impacted as they're watching the news.
Yeah.
But eventually it becomes something that you can really tailor.
That's beautiful. I want to move into because you kind of transitioned nicely here to that after crisis support. Just during the crisis, just to touch on a couple of points that you both made that are critical. Make sure you are monitoring social media. So if that's someone else you have to assign on your team, because your capacity on the emergency, response is going to be taking you away from the ability to do that. Make sure you have those conversations. Monitor that social media traffic.
You know who monitors social media more than anybody? Your school board.
So
right? Like
true.
so yes. I think that's a really important point.
And nobody holds back on social.
And maybe that's a great job for a school board member. I know in times of crisis, many times school board members want to be relevant. They want to be present. They want to be active. I don't know. I've never thought about it, man. I guess an assignment could be, hey, can you keep your eye on social media and keep me apprised of what you're seeing?
If you have a good, now this just depends on what your relationship with your school board is, right? If you've got these clear lines and there's tension there, right? With our school board, if they see something before I see it, like they'll say, hey, did you see this?
Did you see this? Yeah.
Right, and then I'll respond. But our comms team does a great job of monitoring the channels, and it's not even just Twitter or Facebook. It's these groups that have stood up like across the country. Next door, I think, is one of them, where they're these groups where you've got fans and you've got folks that aren't so happy with everything that's happening all the time, whether you're doing a good job or not.
Absolutely.
And that's an opportunity for them to poke you in the eye or to pat you on the back. So I think that for us, one of our strategies is really digging in on what are those those groups within our community that have large followings. How do we infiltrate those? How do we keep an eye on those? And whose job is that when something like this happens?
That's beautiful. The last thing I'll touch on there is something that you mentioned. I want to make sure it came kind of across clearly, is holding statements, especially if you have a team of people taking calls and fielding calls, having some holding statements, not necessarily talking points about what the crisis emergency is. Maybe we haven't even gotten to that point yet, but just having some initial holding statements ready for those individuals as they're receiving the calls, just kind of puts everything on hold. Hey, we're getting messaging out, that kind of a thing. So that you really covered very, very well, kind of that during a crisis. Really appreciate all that work. Let's move into the after a crisis. And you talked about this just a little bit, Randy, but talk me through after a crisis. Maybe it's the Marshall Fire example, but what is your process there? We're talking counseling and systems of supports and continued messaging, and talk me through that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a critical component, right? Once you've made it through the actual crisis, the steps that you're going to make after to take care of those that were affected are critical, right? And so, you spoke to servant leadership and, this idea of empathy, and Randy likes this term, chief, what do you say, chief?
It's chief commander-in-chief and, counselor. I think
chief
counselor
or something.
I think it's usually what I say, counselor-in-chief.
Yeah, either event. And so it's important that you're monitoring and making sure you're taking care of people, and you're communicating in that in a way that lets folks know that there's help and support.
Beautiful.
And I think that's critical. I think the other thing post-crisis, and you almost have to set this up during the crisis, is if you don't have a plan for what are you going to do with everybody who calls you who wants to help.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to have a plan. So we have a foundation that sits outside of the school district. A lot of bigger school districts have foundations, or where we were able to quickly say, hey, if you want to donate money, I called up our executive director of Impact on Education. That's our foundation. I said, Allison, you're it, right?
Brilliant.
Like, I'm tagging you, set something up, and then you can push folks there. And they generated millions of dollars to help and support.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, they were able to say, look, this is to help in the Marshall Fire. And then after the crisis, we started identifying needs. with those dollars, we've been able to provide extra counseling. We provided, after the Marshall Fire, every kid who lost their school supplies showed up the first day. They had a book bag that they got to pick out, filled with materials and supplies. It also gave us an opportunity for all of our community members who wanted to help. It gave them something productive to do. Because Matthew, if you don't do that, folks are going to start doing their own things, and then you're trying to manage and navigate that. So
true.
If I could, give some advice, it's think about what are you going to do with the people who want to help and the people who want to donate money, and who's going to organize that. So you're not just saying, hey, we don't need help. We had 1,000 homes burned down. Of course we need help. Like if I were to say we don't need help, right, I would have lost trust. Of course we needed help, and here's what you can do. And that's if you don't think of that ahead of time, it's just going to overwhelm you.
And I think one of the things that he said is really key, which is, as a chief communications person, as a superintendent, being able to identify as you're having these conversations, oh, we need to bring this person in. So, it was pretty, early on, we're thinking about these kids are essentially homeless. They've lost their homes. We need the McKinney-Vento person at the table. We need Allison at Impact on Education, our education foundation there, because you're going to need that help. And then I would say too, that the ability to both have it's tight and loose, that idea that you really have to have pretty strict command line so that you're not spending staff time rummaging through old crap that people have just brought in, which you see in disasters quite often. They want to do good. They're coming with their hearts out, but they're bringing stuff that you just don't need. And so, by having that clear line that we're going to give that to the foundation, we're not going to handle that money. All that's going to be handled off. We don't have to worry about the questions of where all that's going to go. Was kind of key. But on the same time, our schools are directly facing, the kids in the Marshall Fire lost everything. They walked out of their house or ran out of their house with just the shoes on their feet. They didn't have boots. They didn't have winter jackets, the things that they needed for the next day when it snowed. I mean, we're talking December here in Colorado. And so thankfully, we were able to, our schools were able to work with their parent groups and give them some, you don't usually set up a whole encampment of supplies in a parking lot of a school, but at Coal Creek, they did. And I think it was really smart that both the principal and our operations team supported that and saw that there was the right reason to have some flexibility.
And that's key, right? You need to set rules, and then you need to know when to break the rules, right? And I think that that's a balance. And again, it comes back down, Matthew, to knowing your community, right? And knowing and understanding that people want to help and do good. And a hard no, or a we don't need your help, in a time when we do need, you'll erode trust that it'll be tough to get back.
I'm not ashamed to admit, I never thought about leveraging my foundation in that way. That's brilliant.
It's one less thing for you to be navigating. And in the Marshall Fire, I mean, you've got to remember we had 40 employees, lost everything. And the way that this fire worked, it's not like it was just like a little house fire, like to the ground, fireproof safes melted. The fire got so hot because you couldn't, so nothing, ashes, rubble, everything. So
it's devastating.
Yeah,
and you want to think about the fact that, as a school district, you don't want to be dealing with some of the risk here. The idea that when people are giving you money and it's a crisis and they're, again, they've lost everything. And we see that in the foundations that are supporting the community. There then becomes questions about, okay, where did that money go? Did you do it right? We got a job to do that's hard every day in public education. Why would we want to take on something that's just that tricky when you've got a good partner that deals with money, that knows sort of the way that these things to flow? They're a nonprofit, 501c3, get the right paperwork.
That was connected with the other foundations, because it wasn't just our foundation. There was a community foundation. Money was coming into, and so if you're able to do that, they're able to coordinate with these other foundations where folks are just, for the folks who didn't have kids, right? In our instance, and just raising, millions and millions of dollars. People were incredibly generous.
It's a beautiful story to hear that, and really good tip. Kind of wrapping up, you've shared a lot of really great, valuable lessons. We haven't talked about reporters. If we want to take a moment, we can talk about how that works.
Sure.
But I'd love to kind of wrap up with just kind of last tips that you would have. If you have anything you haven't shared yet, we can certainly take a moment to talk about reporters and how that kind of works out. But I'm just going to open the table to the two of you here.
usually the reporters are kind of the first thing that come up,
Yeah, it's funny.
during a crisis.
We got all the way to the end of the video here. We haven't talked about
So like,
it.
when we had the whole situation with the swatting, we're out there, we're doing a press conference with the police chief and providing information. It's a key element of it. They are a key conveyor of the information. You want to look at them. And I know it's sometimes hard, especially in the environment that we're in sometimes, where they've got gotcha journalism. And I'm a former journalist. I still like a journalist at heart to a certain extent. And so, I know that they've got a job to do. I approach it from that kind of perspective. They're looking as much as possible to try to get the information and get it out as quickly as possible. And that it matches up really with what we're trying to do. But we also have a job to do to try to make sure that kids are taken care of and that kind of thing. So, a few things I would say, lessons learned from crisis, set time, make sure that they know when you're going to come out and speak to them next so that they're not hounding you in the in-betweens. That's a key part of it.
Great.
Make sure that you're protecting kids. I think when you think about the Marshall Fire, you had, again, more than 1,000 homes burned. A lot of kids were hurting at that point. We made sort of a decision that, we knew that a lot of people wanted to see them. They wanted to hear their stories.
Yeah.
But we're not going to our job is to protect them and support them, not to be exploiting them.
Right.
And there was a point, again, rules are meant to be broken. There were elements in which there was a journalism class that their work was to cover their own fire. And so they're already doing it. They're interested in talking to the media and learning from them and back and forth and all that kind of thing. So, we kind of had a shield, and then we could have let people through when it made sense. But, overall, you want to kind of protect them. And then the last thing I'd say, and this might be a good segue to you, Rob, is the idea that, again, before the crisis happens, having good reporters that you've developed relationships with is key. Yeah. So we have one that works out of our NBC affiliate that we know that when we call them, that they're going to cover it in a way that's heartfelt, fair. He'll ask the hard questions. There's no question that he will. But we know that we'll get a fair shot out of him. And I think it's okay to say no to certain reporters. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't talk to people at a press conference. Right. Like there's kind of multiple angles to this, but when it comes to features and that kind of stuff, there are certain people that you might facilitate that with, or when it comes tough and you're dealing with the ash questions, like I'm not shutting anybody down. We will support, we will get information. I believe in being transparent, but to have somebody that you can kind of turn to, and that for that tough moment, I think that was really tough for you to sit down with Nelson at that point.
Well, it was just really raw. It was raw. Again, the thing we haven't talked about is sometimes you're dealing with a crisis, and you're in the crisis yourself. Yeah. Right. Where I watched on TV, our close friends, their home burned down. They were living with us at the time. Right. So every day when I came home, right, I was managing and working, and then I came home and really saw the impacts. Yeah. And I think, Matthew, it just depends on where you are. Like in some places, they're going to expect the superintendent to have a press conference, take questions. If you're in a smaller area, maybe it's the neighborhood reporter. Just depends on the context. And I do think that it's important to know and understand that reporters play a role in informing the community. Sure. And, I try to have very good relationships with folks. Yeah. To Randy's point, we answer questions, but, to use another baseball analogy, again, here in St. Louis, you don't have to swing at every pitch, right? You don't have to swing at every pitch. Yeah. Somebody asks you a question, you can say as a superintendent, the message that you want to say, right? Like when I go into an interview, it's what are the 3 big things that I want everybody to know? And they can ask any question that they'd like. And I make sure that those are the things that I say. And that's hard. It takes practice. It's intimidating, right? To Randy's point, sometimes if you have a reporter, their job is to try to make you look silly, or their job is to try to stump you, or their job is to try to get you on your heels. It just takes practice and time. But, over time, it's just, get your main messages across, what you want folks to know.
And if you know that somebody's got a reputation of that gotcha sort of thing, it's okay to give them a statement. You don't have to, again, I don't believe in playing. I think it can hurt you more than it helps you. And I think this is both true in media and social media. I know we talk about this a lot. That you go hardcore, hardball with somebody on social media and you'll pay for it. It's better to play high road. It's better to have your ethics and be able to always feel like, we're gonna treat people fairly. But if again that's their mantra, then you're gonna get a written statement from us, and that's gonna be okay.
I back that up as well. And I had a couple of reporters through my tenure at my school districts that everything was in writing. You know, I had just learned the hard way that everything needed to be in writing with this particular individual. You said a couple of things in there. I would also add, just keeping in mind that reporters do have multiple stories a day, multiple deadlines. They can feel really pushy. Even sometimes your local reporters that you do have a good rapport with can sometimes come across really pushy because they're working really hard to get the story, and they got a lot that they're working through as well. On the flip side, both of you referenced something that I've also experienced, is just be cautious too, especially when you're dealing with reporters you're not familiar with, and there are tactics out there. Sometimes they approach you really, really friendly. Sometimes there's leading questions. Well, what do you think went wrong? What would you do? Avoid speculation.
Right.
So there are some gotchas in there to watch out for. I also find that sometimes in times of crises, reporters that get assigned to you aren't necessarily on the education beat.
That's right.
And they don't know
Right.
what that is. I had a reporter come to a board meeting. Community was up in arms about a particular issue. Really long series of public comments, 5-6 hours of public comment. We went till midnight. And the reporter is hearing from the parents outside how angry they are that the board was unresponsive to their public comments. And the reporter, I can see, is going to run with that. Really? They weren't even talking to you in there. I saw this. And so let the parents speak, do their thing. They need to be able to voice that. But I also was, in that moment, able to talk to the reporter immediately after and the parents and just talk about the legality behind.
Right.
Things have to be agendized. You know, we have laws that govern how boards can interact with the public. And when there's public comment, we can put that down to bring to a future board meeting. But if it wasn't on the agenda, we can't talk about it. The Brown Act makes sure that other parents have the ability to see the agenda and know if that topic being discussed is something for them to come and hear and listen to. We can't just do that spur of the moment through public comment. That's a law. And that reporter had no idea, never had covered education before. And as such, that portion didn't make it into the story. And I think it had a relevant impact for any other viewers out there that don't understand how those laws work either and would have just heard that our board is insensitive and they don't care. So kind of just tend to that. The reporter piece is critical. They need us just as much as we need them.
That's right.
Last thing I'd say is the national orgs too. In the event of a serious crisis, I'll never forget the day Al Jazeera called me. I mean, you're going to get stuff from all over the world potentially. And just remember that those national organizations are here for the moment, and your local organizations are really here to support your community ongoing for the duration of your time that you're there together. So I always tended to my local organizations first, and then got to those national organizations. So they're going to move on to the next story, probably within hours, where my local orgs are going to be there to support me in my time of need. Any closing thoughts that either one of you want to share that we haven't talked about today? This has been amazing.
Matthew, first of all, again, thanks so much. I really hope that the lessons that we've learned through our careers and through some of the crises that we've been through recently are helpful to others as they're preparing. And you're not going to get everything right. You know, you're not going to get everything right. You're going to make mistakes. And if you make a mistake, own it. Tell folks, you know the mistake you made and what you're going to do better next time. Lead with your heart, right? You know, you can't. I would say the one thing that we talked about is that we didn't really touch on is that in a crisis, you know, don't let great be the enemy of good, right? In communicating, if you're trying to wait, it just depends. You know, some people are more comfortable communicating than others. They have to have the teleprompter. They've got to be dressed a certain way. They've got to be, you know, they want to check all the boxes, right? You have to get over that, right? You've got to communicate in the moment. Speed matters, right? And don't let great be the enemy of good. And you're going to make mistakes, and just make sure that you lead with for superintendents who might be watching, lead with your heart, right? You know, care about people. Make sure you check in on folks. I think the one thing we talked about as a communicator is we didn't talk about is the personal calls that I made.
Yeah.
Right, to the city mayors, right? Hey, we're with you. I know you can't talk right now. We're with you. Tell us how we can help you. We're with you on this. I've found all of the district leaders and principals whose homes burnt down. I called them to check on them. What do you need? Do you need a place to stay? What can we do for you?
Yeah.
Right? Lead with heart, and then you'll help your community heal and get through, you know, whatever it is you're going through.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, off of what Dr. Anderson was saying, was just the idea that continuous improvement, you won't be perfect. I always feel like everything in school PR is just a continual iterations of improvement. you spot something, you work on it. And I think that the organizations that you're part of, your local SPRA chapter, your national NSPRA, they're here to help. I cannot tell you how many sessions I've been in that have guided me. And I think, as I mentioned earlier on, I was pretty scared of crisis communication coming in. And yes, I've learned some things firsthand and have been able to implement it. But a lot of what I've been able to implement were out of the things that I saw in sessions here at the NSPRA seminar, that calling up my buddies in other school districts in Colorado and being able to say, I'm dealing with this for the first time. How did you handle this? How did you handle the craziness that was going on at the board in your district? Yeah. I saw it on the news. Can you give me some insights? Yeah. And I think that also is the flip side of it is, so reach out if you need help and you're a rookie or a veteran that is facing something for the first time. And the flip side, if you've gone through it, share that expertise, because it might feel, I think we're all pretty humble in our jobs, or a good chunk of us are. We feel like standing up and saying, oh, this is what I did. It's kind of like beating your chest. Yeah. But people need to hear that, and then they create their response off of your lessons learned. So it's really helpful.
That's awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. This has been absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to get it out there to the masses. It is, like I said, one of those topics that's really, really talked about deeply at every session or seminar I've ever been to, and this has been wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Hopefully you also found this helpful out there. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, comment, follow for more. Get in there in the comments. Happy to get in there and participate with you, answer any questions. If you do have questions, I know Randy and I are happy to take those calls. Com stuff, templates. If I have any resources to link to that you're looking for from the video, be sure to check that in the description below. We got a lot more coming at you on Peachjar Extra Credit, so stay tuned.